Hi, I'm Chris from Discount Aquarium Fish and Reef in Tempe, Arizona. Today we're going to talk about hang-on overflows. First question everybody asks me with hang-on overflows, are they safe? Do they work well? Are they dependable? The answer to all those questions is yes. If installed properly, you can have safe operation without the risk of flooding your sump, flooding water out of the tank. So we're going to talk about how to do that, different kinds of overflows, and we're going to plumb one up here so that you can see how we start it and get it into operation. First off, my favorite type of overflow is usually made by e-shops. Other companies make these boxes as well. They have a box that goes on the inside of the tank with strainers. They have an outer box which takes the water down out of the tank. They use tubes, suction tubes, in order to achieve the water flow. The important thing with these suction tubes is that they are long enough so that they come down into this middle section here, which is where the tubes will always be, not on the sections that drain water out of the tank. Sometimes they use one tube, sometimes they use two, but again, you want that intake to be under that level. It can't be up higher or you'll run into problems. The second type of overflow box that we often see is actually more expensive, generally made by CPR. This is an old beat up CPR overflow. CPRs are a single piece acrylic overflow system. You can see that the water comes up through the inside of this, from the interior of the tank to the back of the tank, goes through our bulkhead down to our drain. Real reason I don't like these as well. These use a tube that goes into this internal cartridge here. In order to be able to evacuate, you can put a longer tube so that you can evacuate the air out of there when you start this overflow. You would then either need to plug this tube, or you would have a device called an aqua lifter that sets up top here, plugs in. It's just redundancy. To me, it's something else to go wrong. When the power goes off, that aqua lifter starts back up and starts this overflow, siphoning again by evacuating the air out of the chamber. That problem is solved with the e-shops type, which I highly recommend going that direction. We've got a 20-gallon tank on the top here. I've set a sump down below for demonstration purposes. I've hung a small overflow on the top here. This is a Seaside Aquatics overflow. They've made the process of starting this suction tube, evacuating that air, a little bit easier by gluing in a fitting here for your air tubing. That way, when we get ready to start this overflow, we can open this valve, suck the air out of the intake tube, and start the overflow. If you're not as lucky in having a deal like that where you have a tube on the outside here, you'll be using the overflow pipes. In this case, for your first startup, this won't be a problem afterwards because these will start themselves again. Anytime there's a power outage, they will stop so that the water will stop flowing. We'll show you all that in a minute. You have to insert a tube up inside of here like this, an air tube, and then you have to carefully put it on the box like this. You'll have your tube going down into that center section between the drain sections. And when you start this box, you'll have to manually suck the tube in order to get the air out of this and start the siphon. The one we're using, again, has a tube installed, makes that a little bit easier. I filled this tank up full, and that has allowed water to get into the front side of this overflow box. This overflow box has a slide on the front, which allows you to determine how high up on those fins the water level is going to be. I always slide them all the way up, go ahead and get the water as high as I can in the tank. I've also filled the sump with water down below that we're going to be pumping back up into the tank. We'll talk about how you determine what level to put that sump at and how you know how full you can fill it if you want to fill it as full as possible when you're going on vacation. I've taken a return line here, which is just 3/4 inch tubing. It's connected to a pump down in the end of the sump there, which is called a return pump. That's to pump water out of the sump, return it to the tank. All goes right, that water is going to go over your overflow box, back down into your sump. It's fairly important to note this. This is a small device that CPR sells, eShop sells. All it is just a little nozzle elbow that goes over the top of the tank here. This one has a little flare on the other side. The only issue with these is they go down pretty far into the tank if they're not boosted up with a little block like I've done here. You kind of have two options, but you want to get this nozzle up fairly high. You can see, even with it as high as I've got it here, a fair amount of water has still siphoned down when this pump is off through the overflow, through the return nozzle. You don't want to have your return down too low with nothing to stop that water coming down, because then when the power goes off, your overflow can stop, do everything it's supposed to do, but you can have too much water siphon out down to where the nozzle level is in your return. You got a few options there. One of them is you can cut a block of wood or a block of styrofoam like I've done here to boost that up a little bit higher. Another option is you can actually drill a small hole in this return nozzle so that will act as a siphon break, which is up above where the nozzle is, so that will break the siphon rather than the water going all the way down to the tip of that when you turn off the pump. So either way there, if you do drill the little hole though, you will have that little bit of water squirting out of there. And you may not want that. So I've just done a little booster here. The other option that some people use that I don't prefer, they'll put what's called a one-way check valve on this return line. It'll usually be down towards the pump. It's got an arrow on it which shows which direction water flows. It doesn't allow water to flow the opposite direction. A little flapper comes down when the power goes off. I don't like to depend on that. What if that flapper's been up for a year and then it doesn't flap down when you finally need it and the power went off? So I like to have it set up with my return up pretty high, so I don't need to worry about that when I'm working with my overflow system. That said, let's go ahead and start up this overflow. I've selected a pump which won't be too large. Generally, when you've got a 1-inch bulkhead fitting coming down out of your overflow box, you're going to be able to take down 850 gallons an hour of water. If you have two, you would double that. If it's 1.5 inches, it'd be 1,200 gallons. That's how you kind of determine what size return pump you're going to want based on the overflow box that you're installing. There's a couple ways that this box drain can be plumbed. I've plumbed it here with a flexible tubing that eShops makes, and I've hooked this flexible tubing into the intake for this sump. This sump has two. We're using a single drain, so I've just used one of them. On your bigger overflow boxes, you may have two. Alternatively to using the flexible tubing, you can always hard plumb these with PVC and elbows. In this case, you would come out here, you would come down and over and go into your sump. The only thing that's a little bit easier with the flexible tubing is, one, you don't have elbows to restrict flow coming down, and two, a lot of times when you have a wet dry, not a sump like this, it'll have a top that needs to be removed where that water goes in to get at where its first sponge layers are. If you don't have it soft flexible tubed, it's hard to work with the rigidity of a hard plumb into that top. So that's why these soft tubing coming down can be a better way to go. Alternatively, you can use 1-inch nylon tubing, just like this tubing, clear, black, whatever, 1 inch, and that will fit onto your 1-inch fittings and be able to drain down into your sump as well. I've got this pump plugged in. I've got the water filled up above the fins in my top tank. The drain tube is inserted into the section here that has a small baffle, not into the section where the drain is there. That's important, so this end is always going to be underwater. It would have to be underwater for starting up and restarting should the power go off. When I plug this pump in, water's going to start pumping into this tank. I'm going to go ahead and take this little thing off right here so that I can get at this being open. I'm going to plug this with my finger. I'm going to suck through that. I'm going to start my siphon so that that water can get down into the overflow here. And now what you can see is your wife is yelling because we've got a tank that is overflowing over the top. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to shut this pump off. That's going to stop us from making a mess in the house. You'll notice our overflow is still feeding over right here, feeding some water down into that sump. We've also got some water coming back down through our tube here into the sump. This is because the overflow's got fins on it. It's going to siphon down to where it can't get any more water. It is going to maintain water in this chamber here, and it's going to maintain water in its chamber inside. This will stop siphoning when we get to the tip of that, so it's not going to siphon water. We're not going to overflow our sump down by the bottom. Now, the reason that this tank overflowed here is because we selected a pump that's a little bit strong for this particular application, meaning that the 850 gallons that you saw flowing down through once I started here, that 850 gallons was not able to go down quick enough for the probably 1,200 gallons or something with the pump I selected, which is too big. Simple thing you can do there, when you install this tube here, if you have any thought that your pump might be too big, or if you don't have an adjustable DC pump that you can just dial down so that enough water can get down out of the overflow, you can put a valve, any kind of valve, just a ball valve in this tube here. You can put it down underneath because this is probably going to be back up against the wall or something like that. That way you can cut back the flow on that should you need to if this overflow is not able to take down enough. Now, as I said before, when power goes back on, this overflow will start its own siphon. The reason is we've got this closed off, so this is a closed tube right here. The bottom of this tube is underwater on this side, and the bottom of the tube is underwater on this side. When I crank up the water and we get water going back into this tank, the water is going to start coming over the fins on the inside, which is going to cause this siphon to start back up. You can see the water has already started. It's the small amount of air is going to come out of this tube. We've got our siphon started again. Now soon we're going to overflow anyway because we can't take down enough water with the strong pump. So I'm going to flip this off. But that shows you how this thing effortlessly starts itself back up. Power goes off. This will stop as soon as it gets down to its fin level, but it will maintain water in the tube. You can see this is stopping right now because it's finished and siphoned down. And that's all there is to really setting up an overflow system on a tank. You can see it easily starts itself back up. You have no problem. Again, the only thing is your pump's got to be the right size, or you have to easily have a valve to be where you can turn that pump down should you not be able to take down as much water as you're pumping up. Thanks for watching. I'm Kline, and this has been my time.